Welcome to another tutorial on Windows PowerShell. I designed this YouTube course targeting mostly students and new IT professionals, but can also be useful for general public and computer enthusiasts. PowerShell is a command line based tool used by system and network administrators to automate administrative tasks rather than clicking through series of commands, which is time consuming and labor intensive. It can be used to write scripts which the admins carry out for things such as upgrades, rollout, onboarding, offboarding, installs of different services, etc. etc. Today, we will go over the most fundamental concepts of PowerShell, including few useful commands and options. And this will help you build your skills on Windows PowerShell version 7 as we move forward in this course. So when you have first installed your Windows PowerShell, when you go in here to the Start menu, you will find the Windows PowerShell version the 7, which we installed in our previous tutorial. Usually, if it is a new install, it will probably show up under recommended options. And remember from our previous tutorial, we also have installed Microsoft Visual Studio Code, because that's where we have the ISE, the integrated scripting environment for our PowerShell 7. In today's tutorial, we will be mostly using the PowerShell command line, also known as CLI, instead of the Visual Studio. The first thing you need to make sure now is that you open your PowerShell 7 command line in administrative privileges, because if you do not open your PowerShell 7 in administrative privileges, some of the tasks that you may be performing in this lecture series may not go through because it needs administrative privileges. So I am logged in as the administrator for this device. However, if you are not logged in as an administrator, you have to open it either by right clicking here and run as administrator, or by typing here PowerShell or PowerShell 7, either or, and then clicking the option called run as administrator. So make sure before we move forward in this lecture that you open your Windows or Microsoft PowerShell as administrator. So once you have opened your PowerShell as the administrator, you'll see at the top on your PowerShell 7, it will tell you that you are the administrator and you are running this program as the administrator at the very top here on the top of that tab. And we know we are in PowerShell 7 because up here it tells us that the PowerShell version is 7.3.1, and this is something that is by default comes up with the new version of the PowerShell CLI or command line interface. Now there are several user configurable settings in PowerShell 7 command line interface that you can configure to make it your own. You can access these settings by right clicking at the top and setting options right here. If you click on that, it'll get you to these settings configuration options. Most of you may change the color schemes and appearance and how this PowerShell command line CLI behave in these configuration settings. But I will not mess around with any of these settings for now, and we will leave them in default because it will make it easier for everybody to follow. But if you want to change any of these look and feel settings, you can go ahead and do it. So I'm going to close that. So let's dive into some options that we can, some things we can do in Windows PowerShell. So the first one I'm going to show you is the version table, which we have used in our previous tutorial video to check what version of PowerShell we have. Remember, it is the $sign and PS version table. Notice today when I enter that particular variable, I enter $PS version table and I didn't put anything else, and I press enter and it came up with a table with the name and the value columns and the associated information displayed on your CLI. So the variables are different form of commandlets because variables can store all types of values. For example, they can store results of command or commandlets, names, paths, settings, values, etc. In other words, variable is a unit of memory in which values are stored. This built-in variable, which is the PS version table, has stored information about the current version of the PowerShell we are working on. So how do you know if something is a variable in PowerShell? We know that this is a variable, this particular command is a variable because it starts with a $. All variables in Windows PowerShell start with a $. So if you have anything on your CLI with the $sign at the front, and that means it is a variable. However, if a variable has stored a table of data, in this case, for example, here's a table with a column name and and value, and each name is associated with some form of a value. If that's the case, then you do have the ability to extract just one row of that variable. In other words, we can extract one row of string associated with that variable. How do you do that? So in this table, I can re-enter that same information, PS version table, and then I can put a dot, and now I can enter something from this column. So any value showing up on my left hand side. So for example, if I want PS version, I can type PS version, press enter, and it gives me this one single line. If I want something else, for example, if I just want to know the operating systems version that I'm operating on right now, I can type the same thing, PS version table, but instead of PS version, I'm going to type OS and press enter, and it gives me that bit of information. So if a variable is storing multiple pieces of data on a table like this, you would be able to extract one single line from this variable. And notice that when I was typing here, so if I put PS variable, if I don't type anything in here, and if I just put a dot here, for example, notice this side of this, the PowerShell in this particular arrow turned red. So there are little details on your PowerShell 7 that make it easier for scripters like you and me to figure out whether the PowerShell command is valid. For example, this is an indicator for us to tell this command is invalid. For example, if I press enter right now, it's pretty much asking for a additional information because it's not complete. And you can exit out of things in PowerShell using Control-C. That's what I did here. And this is something very useful that Microsoft has built into the PowerShell 7 and also some previous versions of PowerShell as well. So basically this part become red if the command is incomplete, and it'll let you know. So in other words, you can type a command, and if it is not complete, it'll give you an indicator, there is something wrong there. So I'm going to clear this for now. And another thing you need to understand about variables is that not all variables have tables of data. For example, the PS version table, it has a table. So it basically have a table of like with a name and a value, right? But if you use a a variable such as profile, it doesn't have a table. It shows what kind of PowerShell profile, where I am located in this particular computer, and it shows the location here, but it doesn't have a table. In other words, if I go $profile, and if I start typing something here, it doesn't really matter because there is nothing there. So this is a valid command, so it doesn't turn red here, right? Because there is something attached to this. But if I remove that, see, it turned red. But it doesn't matter what I type here, it's not going to return anything because we don't have a table associated with this particular PowerShell variable. So keep that in mind. Not all PowerShell variables have tables. So you can't actually extract data like we do it with the PS version options. So keep that in mind. So that is an important concept that everybody who is new to PowerShell should understand. So just because of a variable has table doesn't mean all variables have tables. So PS version table does have different things you can extract, different values you can extract. For example, platform, I can extract just a platform value, but it doesn't necessarily mean that is the case with all the variables. So keep that in mind. Now you can get the same information as the PS version table that's shown on here with a commandlet. So if I clear this, and if I just type PS version table, and we can get the exact same information by using get-host command. It just displayed in a different way. So this PS version table is very similar to this get host commandlet. So for example, if I type like even a commandlet such as something like update-help, that'll go ahead and start updating the the information associated with our help database. So if I press enter right here, what that's going to do, it's going to go ahead and fetch Microsoft databases associated with commandlets and PowerShell, other PowerShell configuration information, and it gonna get updated on this machine. In other words, next time I need some helpful tips on something, if I want to figure out something, I can type help command, and every help command associated with commandlets will be updated. So in other words, this commandlet has these two sections, just like this commandlet. Notice that the variables in PowerShell don't have that division. There is no dash in variable right here, for example, right? It has a $sign, so we know it's a variable, and it go ahead and then you can enter the variable name, whatever the variable you're pulling. But with commandlets, you don't have that $sign, so that that's not a variable, that's a commandlet. Commandlets have the format of verb and noun pair. So the verb is get and the noun is host. The verb is update and the noun is help. So in other words, the verbs are is something like update, get, new, add, rename, etc. And the nouns can be things like help, service, history, transcript, etc. And these word noun pairs are all approved and controlled by Microsoft. So by default, the word noun pairs that you get on your Windows PowerShell 7 are approved Microsoft configurations. Can you create word noun pairs for yourself in Windows PowerShell? Yes, you can. But by default, just know that you have this word noun pair. And commandlets are basically written and run in the .NET framework, while the functions are series of actions run directly on PowerShell. So keep that in mind, back of your mind, even though you may not know as a novice learner of PowerShell what is .NET framework. I will cover that in a separate video. The commandlets are based on the .NET framework, while the variables are basically directly run on the PowerShell itself. So variables and functions basically directly run on the PowerShell configurations. So it's an important concept. Once you get to learn about .NET framework, which I may cover in a different series, maybe you will understand the importance of it. Another important thing I should also point out is that the PowerShell is a very versatile tool and it's very powerful. I should mention this earlier, especially when you run in the administrative privileges. So I am running PowerShell in my lab environment. If you are running this on your own desktop computer, please be careful, because you can mess something up, and that could cause your computer to crash, etc., etc. So keep that in mind. So I'm going to clear this. And another thing I'm going to show you now is that, how can we view all the available commandlets, right? So for example, the only reason that that the command get dash host exists, so get dash host exists is because I told you that, right? And if I press enter, sorry about that, that's an error. Press enter, you can see that it gives information because I told you that the get host is a commandlet that has the verb noun pair, and that will return our host information, right? But how do you know, as somebody who's new to PowerShell, how do you know the default commandlets already available on PowerShell 7? So I'm going to clear this screen. If you want to know how to clear the screen, it's clear. So just type clear and press enter. It'll clear your PowerShell CLI. So if you want to know, all the commandlets we have, we can enter something which is also a commandlet that will give you all the available commands. So that would be get dash command, which is a useful command that you can use, a commandlet that you can use to list all the available commandlets on PowerShell 7. So if I press enter, it'll give me a list of commandlets that are available in PowerShell 7, and that's a lot. So you can see, you can go through all of these things, and it'll tell you whether it's a function and whether it's a commandlet as well. Functions are basically series of actions that are directly run on PowerShell, just like variables, while the commandlets, as I mentioned, is part of the .NET framework. And these are all the available ones we have on the PowerShell 7. And you also see the version of PowerShell which these items are part of, and it shows all of them right here. Now it also lists not only commandlets and the functions, it also lists something called aliases right here. And I will go over what are aliases in the next few minutes, but basically, the PowerShell has different items such as aliases and if I go down here, functions and the commandlets, and all of those default ones get listed on your screen on your CLI if you enter this particular command, get command on your CLI. So if you don't know what to use, you can do this. Now the problem with this is basically it's a very long list, and you might have to go through this to figure out what you want to do. So how can we make it is so either like a filtered down, like a way of saying it's the filtered down version of this list, so that you don't have to look at all of this when you want to find something? Well, to do that, we can do a switch. In PowerShell, we have something called a switch, and that allows you to only filter down what you would like to get display on CLI. So I'm going to clear this screen so it's easy for you to see. So to do that, what I'm going to do, I'm going to use the same command, get command, command, and I'm going to put space in here, and I'm going to put dash, and I'm going to put noun. So the reason I do that, remember, all commandlets and functions are written, and even aliases are written in a way that so that they are always verb noun pairs, right? So that's why I'm doing this. So I'm gonna tell the PowerShell, go and get all the commands, but not everything, because I'm gonna add a switch. This is called a switch. So dash noun means this is now become a switch. That means it is actually sorting by that particular restriction. So it is actually only gonna filter into that particular restriction. So that is called a switch in PowerShell. And I'm gonna say I want everything that has something to do with a service. So I'm going to say I want get command, but I don't want everything. I only want the ones that has service in the noun. And if I press enter, I only get a list of items that only has service in its noun sides. Remember, this is a verb, noun, verb, noun, verb, noun, and everything with service in the noun going to get listed here. So instead of having that command where you have everything listed like that, where you have to go through and find all the service items, by entering get command dash noun switch with the service, you only get the service items listed here. So this make it easier for you to basically go through the process of finding information, finding commandlets, or finding aliases or functions with that particular item. So you can do that with anything else as well, the commandlets and functions and aliases as well. But that will make it easier for you to figure out what you're looking for. Now, some of the commands we use in command prompt, which is, remember, is the Microsoft previous attempt at this type of thing. So this is the command prompt. Some of the functions that we use on command prompt can also be used on the PowerShell, because PowerShell is basically kind of amalgamated or like a combination of some command prompt material as well as the .NET framework designed system, right? So basically how it works is there are reasons why you can do this. Like one is that either they have aliases associated with a particular command prompt commands that we use, so that those aliases are associated in PowerShell, or they are associated with programs in the System32 folder. So some new, some people who are new to PowerShell and especially students, they think that the only reason that we can use the command prompt commands in Windows PowerShell is that because they all have aliases. Not necessarily true, because it could be an alias. It could also be that there are programs that is associated in System32 folder. If you have watched my previous video, for example, on check disk command, the chk disk is actually launching the chkdisk.exe file from the System32 folder. So in other words, like let's try chkdisk, and this is actually launching that chkdisk System32.exe file. So if I press this enter, I'm going to go ahead and do the check disk. So I'm gonna get out of that with Control C. And you can also know this by if I type chkdesk and if I press tab, look what happened. It actually changed from chkdsk to /chkdsk.exe. So this is actually proving my point that this particular command that I have entered here, this particular text string, is pulling system32, the file called chkdsk.exe, because it's doing exactly the same thing. So keep that in mind, because that is an important thing that some people forget. You don't necessarily always need aliases, like for example ipconfig, right? If I press tab, it tells you, guess what? It's running ipconfig.exe executable file out of the system32 folder. So that, because the reason for that is the ipconfig is the command prompt version of it, and it is actually pulling that from the system32. So what is the proper one for ipconfig that if you want to do it in proper, Windows PowerShell method? Well, remember it's the pair. Remember verb noun pair that we will be using. So to get that information, we are trying to get something, right? So we're going to use the get verb, and with the noun net IP either address, which will give us the IP address information, which is similar to what we have up here, or we can do net the same thing, get net. I'll clear this so it's easy for you to see, or we can do get dash net, and we can go IP configuration, and that will also list our IP configuration info. So instead of doing IP config, which will be launching that ipconfig.exe file from the system32, it will be doing the verb noun pair, and that will give us the same information or similar information. So I'm going to clear this. So what I want to highlight here is that there are some commands that we use in command prompts still using Windows PowerShell 7, because they are either aliases or they're directly loading from the system32 file. PowerShell 1 to 5 is written on .NET framework and will only run on Windows operating systems. However, the PowerShell 6 and up, which is we are using right now, PowerShell 7, is based on the .NET Core, which is the modified version of .NET, like a better version of .NET, I would say, that can run on Windows, Linux, and Mac OS. And files you can work with in PowerShell most likely going to be .ps1 files, because that's how we save PowerShell files, as opposed to in the past you may be familiar with .bat file, also known as .bat files, that we use in the scripting in command prompt. So in command prompt sometimes use .cmd or .bat files, but in PowerShells we use something called .ps1 files. In short, aliases are just as the meaning says, is that a term that is use like a commandlet or a function or executable file, including scripts, and the PowerShell include a set of built-in aliases, and we know this from, remember, by typing in get command, and if I press enter, and on this list we have a bunch of aliases that we can use, like things like that, right? So the aliases are like, as it says, as it sounds, alias is a pointing to something that that can be a function within your PowerShell CLI that is not a commandlet, which is basically unique to PowerShell itself. So aliases and direct launching application on PowerShell allow us the backward compatibility with command prompt and previous versions of Windows CLIs. I'm going to clear this again. Another important thing you should learn is how autocomplete work. So you have seen me going through different options and typing in different things, and you may have noticed already that I'm pretty fast with completing commands on this Windows PowerShell 7 CLI. So how did I do that? So basically, if I type get, for example, it remembers my previous history, so it actually gives this grayed out part. It says dash command, and if I just want to complete that based on that my previous history, I can press the right arrow key and it will actually complete that command. So same with the PS version table. So if I put a variable, for example, if I type variable, even before typing anything in there, it gives me the option in the previous variable, PS version variables. If you want to look at the items that you have entered previously, you can go up and down with the arrow keys, just like that. And if you want to complete something, so for example, get dash, but I don't want command, I want something else, you can press tab. So if you keep pressing tab, it'll get through multiple options available under get. There you go. It goes from all the way to A to Z, whatever you have. Now, if you want something specific, but you don't want to go through the whole list. So you know the first part of your commandlet, the first part of your verb noun pair. So basically you have the verb, which is get, but you need a little bit of the noun. You can considerably shorten the options we have. So this is tab, by the way. So this is not arrow key or anything like that. This is tab. So I'm tabbing. So if I want everything to do with just something to start with D, you can start with D and start pressing tab, and it'll go everything with D. And if I just want anything with only DA or DB, I can put DB and then put tab. And there's nothing in DB and DC. There's nothing. And DA, oh, there's a bunch of stuff in DA. So even if you are new to Windows PowerShell, by tabbing through here, you can find many available options there. Even if with the variables PS version table, you can find different PS options in here. So there are, see, so you have other variables available on here that you can use. So it all gonna make sense to you as you go through this course, but just keep in mind that there's a way to autocomplete things. Next item I will cover today is the execution policy. PowerShell's execution policy is a safety feature that controls the conditions under which PowerShell loads configuration files and runs scripts. This feature helps prevent the execution of malicious scripts. So execution policy work like a gatekeeper for your commands. Execution policies for the local computer and current users are stored in the registry of your device. So basically, execution policies are actually editing your registry keys. You don't need to set execution policies in PowerShell profile. The execution policy for particular session is stored only in the memory and is lost when the session is closed. So if you want to know what your current execution policy is, you can type get dash. So that's our remember, that's our verb, and we want to know execution policy. If I just type EX and press tab, it's actually give me that option to execution policy. And if I press enter, we can see that we have something called remote sign. So you might ask, what is remote sign, right? Like you type execution policy and it come back with remote sign. Remote sign is what we need for this course, so that everything that you go through, all the commands that you're going to enter will properly, function on PowerShell 7. If you want to know the other options and what they do, they are basically restricted, all signed, remote sign, unrestricted, bypass, and undefined. I will list them on the screen so that you can basically read them through. And each of them have different policy restrictions on how the executions of different commands and PowerShell scripts going to work on your device. You can also search it up. You can go onto the internet and type PowerShell execution policy, and the link from the Microsoft Learn website. You will see the options for execution policies, and you can go through them your own time. So I will leave a link to that as well. For our course, we need to have remote sign. That is the default on PowerShell 7 and PowerShell previous versions like PowerShell 5, for example, which is the default version, comes on your Windows 10 and Windows 11 machines. The default is restricted. That's the typical default policy. But on Windows 11, if you run your PowerShell in administrative privileges, the execution policy will be remote sign, and that's what we need. Again, you can read it through. I may do a little bit of more in depth into how execution policies exactly work later sometime, but for now, that's all you need to know. Now, this particular execution policy has different scopes. What I mean by that is that the execution policy you get here is specifically assigned to your local machine. And how do we know this? If I type execution policy here and put the switch list, so I want to list all the execution policies. I'm telling my commandlet to list all the execution policies. If I press enter, and it gives me the machine policy, user policy, process policy, current user policy, and then etc, etc. So the remote sign here is the local machine policy right now. So for now, just remember that execution policy is a gatekeeper that prevent malicious scripts, PowerShell scripts, from executing on your device, because PowerShell is a very powerful tool and can basically give the godlike powers in your Windows machine. You need to make sure that there's some gatekeeping, and this is how we do it with the execution policies. Again, I'm not going to go any more depth into that for now, but just know what it is. The final thing I want to go over in today's tutorial is what happens if we enter an incorrect or incompatible command. Well, PowerShell has built-in useful error messages that display in red text by default. Unless you change those configurations, it will always display in red. I have opened my PowerShell in administrative privileges, and let's type something incorrect and then press enter. So it will give me the thing called, it doesn't exist, and it can be executed. So it is a very useful tool. So it actually tells you something is wrong and make sure you verify what you're entering. Now, if I have opened this Windows PowerShell without the administrative privileges, it will also give you the information stating that you must have administrative privileges and some additional information. Like, for example, I'm going to go out of my lab environment and I'm going to pull up PowerShell on my desktop machine outside the lab environment. And here I don't have the Windows administrative privileges on this machine. And if I try to set the execution policy to remote sign and press enter, it's going to give me an error message, but it is a very detailed error message. And it also lists that what this commandlet going to do and try to do. It tries to update the H key local machine, this particular registry key. Remember, the execution policy is updating registry key, but it was denied, and it gives you the reason why, because you don't have the administrative privileges. So it gives a very nice detailed information on your CLI when you do something wrong. So in here I can set the execution policy remote sign. The reason for that is it is running on administrative privileges. So I can do remote sign, it'll work fine. But if I do it in the other method, when I don't have the administrative privileges, it'll give me that error message like that. So there are useful error messages that will pop up as we go through this lecture series, and here's an example of that. So just keep that in mind as we move forward. So this is the end of this tutorial. We covered several important PowerShell fundamental concepts. They will act as a foundation for our future PowerShell tutorials. I will cover variables, commandlets, pipes, and more other stuff in depth in the next few weeks. Please make sure to thumbs up this video and subscribe to my channel. Until next tutorial on PowerShell 7, thank you so much and have a nice day.